Hello, everyone. Before we get started, I just wanted to provide a content warning. This episode contains sensitive information about domestic violence and abuse. The content discussed may be distressing and triggering for some of our listeners, and I just want to ensure that everyone is aware of this before listening to the episodes. I understand that these topics can evoke strong emotions and memories for many individuals, and I want to encourage you to prioritize your well-being, your mental health. And if you or someone you know is affected by the issues that are discussed in these episodes, please consider reaching out for help and support. There are resources that are available to navigate through these challenging situations. Before continuing with the episode, I want to remind you that it's okay to take a break or skip the episode if you feel that it's too overwhelming for you. We want to thank you for your understanding and sensitivity towards this matter, and I appreciate you and all of your support, but I also want to make sure that you feel safe and respected. Please take care of yourself and remember that your well-being is important to us. Thank you for listening. Now enjoy the show.
In the grand theater of life, we all seek a comeback, a resurgence, a rekindling of our inner fire. But how do we spark that flame? Welcome to Reignite Resilience. This is not just another podcast. This is a journey, a venture into the heart of human spirit, the power of resilience, and the art of reigniting our passions. Hello and welcome back to Reignite Resilience. I'm excited to be here today, and I'm joined by the lovely co-host, Natalie Davis. How are you today, Natalie?
I'm amazing. Hello, everyone. I hope you guys are doing great.
Fabulous. Well, I'm excited today because we have a very special guest. And so I'm going to dive in, read her bio, and then we're just going to kind of start this conversation. This is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. So I'm just excited about learning more about our guest today. So our guest name is Dana S. Diaz. She is a wife, mother, and author of the best-selling book, Gasping for Air, The Stranglehold of Narcissistic Abuse. Dana has had a lifelong experience with narcissistic abuse beginning in childhood. Her education in journalism and psychology at DePaul University in Chicago gave her the ability to accurately verbalize and express how narcissistic abuse creates confusion and conflicts within victims so that she can help other victims know they are not alone and better understand their own circumstances. Today, Dana is a proud voice for fellow victims who are unable, afraid, or ashamed to share their experiences. She strives to create awareness and understanding to ensure victims are given the support they need to first understand their situation and then begin the healing process. Her first book, chronicling her own abusive marriage that lasted nearly 3 decades, started as a journal that she hid under the couch cushion in the basement. Wow. Well, welcome, Dana. So excited to have you here today. And what I'd love to do is let's just jump in. Like, tell us about yourself. Tell us about your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a long story. And I mean, the book doesn't even cover, that was just the tip of the iceberg. But the second he walked into my life, it was at my workplace. And immediately, I knew he just was not the kind of person I wanted to even be associated with. He reminded me of my abusive stepfather. It wasn't the worst childhood anybody could have, but there was physical and verbal abuse. And my mother hadn't wanted me to begin with and had a lot of shame that I was the result of a teenage pregnancy. So I grew up with this narrative of I wasn't wanted and that I was a burden and a bother, and the physical abuse, basically supported that. So, I'm out in the world thinking I'm never going to let anyone mistreat me again. I'm 19 years old when I meet this guy, but I am so starved of love that even though all these red flags and sirens are like, don't, Dana, it's like, I'm Lost in Space, danger, yes. Will Robinson, danger. It was just clearly I should not get involved with this guy. But when you come out of a childhood where you weren't wanted and you're made to feel worthless and invaluable and undeserving and made to even feel like you shouldn't even exist, what are you looking for? You're looking for validation from another human being. And he was the only person at that time that was giving me the slightest attention, even though he was very aloof and arrogant. And I definitely felt like this sense of entitlement. it sort of created the perfect storm because here I was, a people-pleasing codependent, eager to please so I could get that little crumb of affection. And he was willing to give me whatever I needed as long as I served his ego and what he needed. So, match made in heaven, not so much, maybe in hell, but I went for it. I found myself honestly kind of acting like my mother, which in my mind was like my worst nightmare. I never wanted to be like her because whenever I would go to her about the abuse from her husband, I always say it was excusing, enabling, or tolerating.
Yeah.
It was always, he's in a bad mood, or maybe you shouldn't have made him mad, or it would be, you're lying to get attention because you're jealous. He never did that. He said he didn't do that. So here I was in this situation with this young man that even very early on, things are being thrown, holes are being punched in walls. There's, the demeaning and insulting, the start of a lovely relationship.
Yeah.
But I'm saying the same thing my mother did. Oh, maybe he had a bad day. I shouldn't judge. I shouldn't dismiss a whole person and a whole relationship based on one night. Or he said he's sorry, he won't do it again. But it never stopped. It just got worse. And the thing that people don't understand about narcissistic abuse is when I look at point A to point B, it started with what I call the little stuff because it's the least life-threatening and least severe stuff.
Yes.
But by the end of that 20-some years, we were in straight-up domestic violence. I have an email in writing, and he admitted to people he wanted to kill me, and he planned to kill me. And I was literally fighting for my life. So how do you get from point A to point B? People don't get narcissistic abuse unless they've been through it.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you find yourself, because I shared with you, I was in an abusive marriage. It was not physical abuse. It was more of the emotional abuse. I found myself trying to make his life easier because I was like, well, if I do more, then he won't be as stressed. And just was like, it made him feel like he wasn't needed or validated. And then it just made it even worse. And I just felt like I was,
Well, that's the thing. Every situation's slightly different, but at the end of the day, anything that they find offensive to their ego, like if you're doing more, it sounds like in your situation, it offended his machismo, like he's the man and he's supposed to whatever. But it was the same in my situation. I mean, I'm sure there were a lot of rules in your house like there were in mine, and some were unspoken. And in my case, there were a couple times, and I still have one of these pages where he would actually write down what he expected of me, how to be a good wife, I was told, and the one that I kept. And the sad thing as I was writing my book and looking back, I had actually checked off some of these things, like a list of chores, because like you, I thought that if I could make things better, if I could make things easy, and just do what he wanted and appease him, then he would be pleased with me. Because when he was pleased with me, it was good.
Yes.
He was affectionate and he was sweet, and I'd get flowers, and he might even make me laugh and we could have a good night. But when he wasn't pleased with me or anything that he blamed on me, because I was the ultimate scapegoat, even if I didn't have anything to do with something, if he didn't get what he wanted, it was somehow my fault. So I just avoided that at all costs. So, I've even had over the years people say, oh, well, I would never be submissive like that. Or maybe you need to be stronger. And I'd be like, well, you know what? It takes a stronger woman to stay in a situation and deal with all this crap. Because, again, we're talking about specific things. But the thing about this abuse is that there's one thing coming at you, then another, then another, then another. It's like being in a minefield. They call it walking on eggshells. I call it a straight up minefield because you don't know. The mood could switch and it could flip in a second, and you never know what the reaction's going to be. And sometimes you expect a big reaction and you don't get one. And sometimes there's something very meaningless and minuscule that's blown out of proportion, and turning into World War III. But like you said, it could be just the verbal, the gaslighting, the manipulation, the demeaning, the insult, this stuff. But they use other forms of abuse, like there's a lot of sexual abuse, financial abuse, legal abuse. Yes. Some people do have the physical, and the funny thing about my ex was that he never actually made contact with me, but there was always physical threat, which still instills fear in you. And then we talk about like stalking and an intimidation. Yeah. Like my ex-husband used to have a very nasty looking knife laying next to him on the coffee table while he watched TV every night. And I knew why it was there. I'm terrified of knives. We wonder why. But it was like a shock collar. I was like a dog that if I was out of line, if I got out of bounds, there was my consequence just sitting right there. So did he ever use it on me? Well, he tried once, but you know, here I still am. But that's the thing that they can't risk you leaving their control. And that means they're going to isolate you from friends and family. They're going to find ways to basically keep you to themselves. I mean, my ex I didn't even have a smartphone until after he'd moved out after the marriage was over, because he didn't like me on the internet. He didn't like me reading books. I couldn't go anywhere because God forbid I was influenced by the outside. He even moved us 90 miles outside of Chicago to some podunk town where here I have a college degree and I couldn't find work. The Walmart wouldn't even hire me because it was the only place to work. And they didn't even have, jobs available. And so I was cleaning houses for 13 years, which, I'm the kind of girl that's like, do what you got to do. We ended up having a son. I'm just trying to hold my end of the bargain, I suppose, in the household. And I'm not beneath that. But there were people that were like I remember working for a judge, cleaning her very magnificent house. And she found out I had a degree from DePaul. And she's like, what the heck are you doing scrubbing my toilets? Yeah. And I'm like, I don't know. That's what he wants me to do. Yeah, survival. Working with his friend's wife because, God forbid, I couldn't tell her, I couldn't expose him, but he didn't want me to have any kind of career where I'd have success or achievement or feel, or even have the financial freedom to be able to leave him. But the irony for me, fortunately, in the end, was that he also decided the last 4.5 years of our marriage that he didn't have to work anymore, ever. That he told me it was my turn to support the house, as if I hadn't already been, but turning me into the primary breadwinner. I will do what I have to do, especially where my son is concerned. And I ended up turning that little cleaning business into a 6-figure little empire. Good. And well, when we divorced, it was, you can go your way. You can take whatever you want, take the house, take the cars, take the money, whatever. I just want my kid. But I also had my income. So I was able to not have to worry about, I can pay the mortgage. I can pay for and I did. I single-handedly, he wrote off our son and everything, had no claim. I didn't even ask for custody or any kind of shared visitation, nothing. Yeah. But he put the primary responsibility of our son's education, his medical insurance, everything was on me. And I'm like, that's fine. I've been paying for it anyway. Yeah. Just get out of my life.
So two things like kind of resonate with me that you just talked about. One, and I felt it very much, the isolation, because they don't want you to have anybody. They don't want you to have a tribe. They don't want you to have friends. And so I was very isolated from my family, from my friends. Yes. And it's got to be intentional, because when you have that sphere of people that you can lean on, it can give you that strength. And then the other thing, you were able to leave because you had created an empire. So it actually was a good thing that he's like, you support us. Oh, yeah. Because I think there's a lot of people, it was the same way for me. I couldn't have left until I changed jobs and was able to make the income that I was able to walk away. But there's a lot of people that don't have that and live in that fear and feel like they're stuck.
Well, and I felt that way for much of my life up to then, because honestly, they actually say that it takes 7 attempts to leave before you finally leave. Yeah. And when I found that out, I counted in my head. The 7th attorney I consulted with over the years was the one I finally filed with. And I had no idea that was a thing, but I had gone to an attorney for the first time in 2005. We didn't actually get divorced until 2020. So for 15 years, believe me, I felt stuck, because after we had our son, here we are again, not just isolated, but he didn't want me to work. He said, oh no, I'm the man. I'm going to make the money. You should stay at home. And, you need to breastfeed. You need to be there for that. And you need to raise our son. And it sounds nice. And that's the thing about narcissists is it always sounds reasonable in the beginning. It's just when you challenge it or things don't go the way they expected them to by making the decisions they make, that's when we start having problems and they start enacting other abuses to get whatever it is they're trying to achieve. So I can't say it didn't work, but I was working in real estate. So, I could kind of work my schedule and there's no quota, so to speak. At least there wasn't where I was working at. So, it didn't matter if I sold a house a year or 20 houses a year. It didn't matter. So I just kind of, I guess I more dabbled in it so I could be home thinking I was raising our son and doing this wonderful thing. And, oh, my husband's so great that he allows me this time with our son. And he wasn't great, but I was trying to be like the queen of silver linings, look at the positive, because there is always something good, even in these storms that we go through in our lives. So I absolutely felt that because every time I consulted with an attorney, I worried because they would say, well, you're entitled to X percent of money for alimony or X percent for child support. But whether he would pay it or not is a different thing, because what every attorney told me is that in a lot of these situations, the spouse that is earning the income oftentimes will either intentionally or even subconsciously somehow either get demoted, lose income, even lose their jobs because they don't want to give you that percentage of money. So I'm a type A. I like a sure thing. I wasn't going to just take my kid and be like, okay, we're just going to wing it and hope this guy pays what he owes. But that's what kept me a lot of years was, I would sit there and plan, well, if I sold this many houses at this much on average, then maybe I could have this income and maybe afford this much for rent. I was trying to plan my escape for that. But in the middle of this, like I said before, all these other things are happening. But in the real world, I mean, even taking narcissism and abuse out of it, anybody who's not wanting to stay in their marriage, how many of them stay for the regular reasons, not just financial, but you think you're doing something noble, staying because you have a child and your families are, he isolated from me from my own family and friends. So all I had was his family, and his parents were actually better parents to me than I had ever had in my own experience with my own. And his sister was my best friend. And I was so involved and so entwined with his family. I honestly couldn't even imagine not having them in my life. And and there's where the threats would come in. If you leave, I will make sure you never see your son again. If you leave, I will make sure you will never see my family again. If you leave, all these things. So it all comes back to fear. They figure out what you're scared of and what your weak spot is. And mine was my kid. And you tell me that you're going to take family away from a girl that never even felt like she belonged to her mother and stepfather in her childhood and had no one now. What was I going to do? I had him, and he wasn't much, but it's what I had. So I would stay and basically live off those little crumbs of good that would come up once in a while.
Wow.
Well, Dana, can we go back? Because it doesn't just happen overnight, right? You're sharing that this is an experience that you had 20 years, like a 20-year relationship.
25,
25-year relationship. In the beginning, when you're 19, and you said that you started to get those downloads of this is not right. This is not really the healthiest of relationships, but you were getting those morsels of, compassion and love and that sense of belonging. When did those red flags begin to pop up for you, and how did they appear?
They literally were the second I met him, the first time I ever met him. I mean, I was not exaggerating that, but he was my only option. And, you have to remember, I'm out in the world by myself. I am living on my own because I left the home, and I'm in college. But, there was also this aspect looking back of, and I still have it now somewhat, just having a hard time connecting with people. And I think that just, I hate to say, I know everybody says it's so cliche to blame the parents, but I mean, from the way I grew up, how could I trust other people when the two people that were supposed to keep me safe, protect me, feed, clothe, and shelter me failed to do a lot? My needs were not met emotionally. They didn't even try. I couldn't connect with people. I didn't have that. So it was hard. I was always kind of a little shyer and withdrawn. But at the same time, I always had a friend or two, like I have a few friends now, that they make me feel safe in exactly as who I am. So I'm like outgoing and crazy, with them. Like I can be me and not fear that abandonment and rejection.
Right.
But I just honestly was like so just anxious to attach to somebody. Because there was nobody. I mean, I had my cat and I loved my cat very much, but, cat.
You needed the human interaction.
Yes.
Well, and I think it's one of those things. It's what you knew, that narcissistic, that's what you knew. So it was familiar. So therefore, in our brain, it almost becomes like safe because you're like, I know this. I've lived this before.
Yeah, that is definitely something that I think happens for a lot of people. And I think that is a factor that helped me accept it, or because I was very firm that no, thank you, not going there, not happening. But there were a lot of things going through my head because you're absolutely right. I mean, even in high school, there were a few boys that asked me out that, I mean, like looking back, I'm like, oh, I would have died. I would have loved to go out with them, but I was so scared of their niceness, this good guy thing. I didn't know what to do with that. I would go out with, the guys with the muscles that would sit at the, like one told me I didn't need the apple pie I ordered for dessert because I would get fat, and who wants a fat girl? And, like this was the stuff that but I was used to that because my stepfather was always commenting about my weight and telling me nobody would want me, and commenting that I was eating pasta and I don't need all that bread, so like that was normal to me, but I was very consciously aware that it wasn't right and that it was unsettling, and it certainly wasn't what I wanted. But yeah, I didn't know what to do with a nice guy. I mean, they were kind of boring, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know for me, it was because I saw those red flags when I was dating as well, all the way up to the day of our wedding. And for me, it was almost like a self-worth thing. It's like, well, if I don't marry him, who's going to want me?
Yes.
Kind of a thing.
Thank you. Because let me tell you, I talk about this in the book, but I accepted the proposal. I was very excited to, like, exactly what you said. Somebody wants me. Oh my God, somebody wants me to be their wife. Oh my gosh. So the wedding day comes and I'm standing there and the wedding march is playing and everybody stands up. I'm panicking because what's going through my head literally at that moment is, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this. This is not the man I want to marry. If I marry this man, I know we're getting divorced.
Yeah.
And I'm stepping one step at a time down that aisle, all these things going through my head.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh my goodness. So then fast forward, I mean, and so you mentioned you talked to seven attorneys.
Yeah,
it was the seventh attorney.
I would never pull the trigger, but it's not funny at all. Actually, it was a whole thing that this is towards the end of my book. Well, the end of the relationship. So I make a plan. I actually got sick somewhere around 2018. I got very, very ill, dropped down to 93 pounds. I was literally skeletal. Yeah, it was awful. Looks great in a bikini, but it's not a healthy weight for a 45-year-old woman. Okay. It's just not. So there were like 24 symptoms, random symptoms. I was blacking out all the time. My hands were going numb. I was having irregular heartbeats, shortness of breath. My muscles, if I sat for 10 minutes, it would take me 10 minutes to stand up, and it was painful. And like, I couldn't understand what was going on. I coached cross country for how many years? I ran 5 miles every day. I'm one of those weirdos that eats very, very like weirdly healthy because I'm very conscious of my body and taking care of it. Like, what is going on? This shouldn't be happening. So long and short of it, I go through test after test, every specialist you can imagine. I was tested for at least half of the autoimmune diseases. And, they found things wrong. Like there was stuff wrong with my heart. They definitely detected very low blood pressure, heart valve situations. There was neurological stuff. There was all kinds of things happening. Finally, a neurologist gets me with Mayo Clinic. Mayo Clinic does a cortisol test. Cortisol is a stress hormone.
Yeah.
They called me and said, we think we compromised the labs. We need to have you do this test again. So I do the test again. And they called me and said, oh, I guess we didn't compromise the labs.
Yeah.
They're like,
because your numbers were so far off the chart.
So high.
My numbers were over 2,500. When they should have been at the very highest, they should hit 600 or 700, but they should be around 100, like in the low hundreds. Mine were over 2,500. And when they do a cortisol test, by the way, every test is comprised of 5 little mini tests. They test your cortisol at 5 different points in a 24-hour period, including you have to wake up in the middle of the night while you're sleeping. Well, unfortunately, my ex had a tendency to either prevent sleep or bother me. Things would happen at night because, what do you think about it? You're most vulnerable when your eyes are closed and you're sleeping, which is why I didn't sleep with him for many years, because I didn't trust him sleeping next to him. I was afraid to sleep even when I slept in the basement, which is where I usually was, because I just didn't trust that that I could defend myself in time, if he came and tried to do something. Anyway, so this cortisol test, they get it back to the doctor. They figure out that all these things that were happening in my body were autoimmune reactions, because apparently my white blood cells decided that they had to eradicate whatever this extraneous thing was in my body, which was all this cortisol that had been running through basically my whole life, because I'd been living in fight or flight since childhood. So not only did I have all these autoimmune reactions, but I was diagnosed with a rare lung syndrome called upper airway resistance syndrome, which they said is like having COPD and fibromyalgia all at once. However, it's classified as a sleep disorder. It's a very strange little thing in itself, but it involves even anxiety and depression, and it just wreaks havoc on you. And all these things are irreversible. So the irony of it all is that even though he never put his hands on me, he could have probably killed me without, because all these things happened as a result of my parents and then him. They started me off and he was finishing me off. But that was the point where, when my doctor sat me down at the end of 2019 and he said, Dana, your body is shutting down. He said, we tell this to people in hospice and you are walking around trudging through life. But at this point, I have a backpack oxygen machine with a mask, all this stuff just to get through every day. I was just deteriorating. And he's like, whatever it is that's causing all the stress, if you don't get it out of your life, stress can kill you. And I'd heard that before, but I didn't realize that I was actually living proof of that. And, I remember laying down that night in the basement, of course, and thinking, I don't want to die. I don't want to be living this life either, because this isn't even my life. This is what he has dictated my life to be. And that is when they say you wake up like something snapped, and I'm like, oh, he has been dictating. So I asked myself this miraculous question that I think everybody should ask themselves. I said, what do I want?
Wow. We hope that you have enjoyed part 1 of our 2-part interview with Dana S. Diaz. Hearing her firsthand account for being in a relationship with a narcissistic individual for decades, knowing that the red flags were always there, and how she navigated through life for all of those years. Make sure you come back and join us for part 2 of the interview, where we'll dive in to some of the important skills and mindset that an individual needs to have if navigating through a narcissistic relationship and ultimately finding a way to get out of those relationships. We'll see you soon. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Reignite Resilience. We hope that you had amazing ahas and takeaways. Remember to subscribe on your favorite streaming platform, like it and download the upcoming episodes. And if you know anyone in your life that is looking to continue to ignite their resilience, share it with them. We look forward to seeing you on our future episodes. And until then, continue to reignite that fire within your hearts.